to the first of the Scottish 9th Age battle reports. I'm going to record some of my playing experiences, and I hope that other members of the Scottish community are going to also add some of their own battle reports to this channel. This game is a summary of a warm-up game that I had before some of the tournaments that I'm going to be playing in during March. So this is Equitaine versus Dwarves, played by my friend Henrik. So first off, I'm going to show the terrain. I've managed to dig up an old program that churns out these very attractive pictures, look very much like old battle reports that most of us would have read as a kid, and which I always enjoyed, so I'm going to try and produce them in a similar style. This was a refused flank deployment, and the objective here was capture the flags, so we had to nominate each other's units. So let's move on to the first up. You can see my friend's dwarves list. You can see he's got a Dragon Seeker and a King. Dragon Seeker being there for the real dangerous output of damage, and the King there to survive earthquakes, nuclear apocalypses, pretty much anything that could be thrown at him. Seeker's there to do the same. They'll grind forever, never ever stopping. Catapult. This is an unmodified catapult, so this was a bit of an experiment for my friend. He said he wanted to see whether it was worth fielding something which was cheap rather than the usual dwarven way. Large unit of greybeards. You'll see that they pretty much have the staying power of any unit. Slightly smaller unit of Kingsguard. No prizes for guessing where the king is going to end up in this deployment. A Vengeance Seeker, which I will never again underestimate. An Engineer to bulk up the catapult, but also carrying one of those Wormslayer rockets to make him just that extra little bit painful for a small character. Miners to come on near the back and to harass things. 2 units of marksmen, one with crossbows, one with handguns. And finally the Forge Wardens. I hate Forge Wardens. I would like to put that out there. That is my personal prejudice. They are extremely painful. This time they're fielded in a 20 wide block, a 10 wide, 20 strong block. I think it's probably a little bit too big and a little bit too unwieldy, but it does put out a lot of damage. And fortunately, my friend and I have corrected our previous assumption that they had a 24-inch range, so hopefully they won't be shooting my Grail Knights to death on turn 1 this time around. And here's the detailed list for anyone who's looking for it. And here's the list that I will be fielding. It's a list that I've been working on for a while, building up ready for a few tournaments that I'll be playing in this year. It's been pretty effective. It's gone through a few iterations, so this is the latest version. In the top left is my favorite part of this army list, my Duke, which has affectionately become known as the Murder Duke. He's tooled up with the Obsidian Sword, with the Virtue, which gives him benefits in challenges. He has a 4-up ward. He has the Blessed Scriptures to half multi-wounds. He is essentially tooled up with everything I can imagine to keep him alive, and then to allow him to win a challenge and murder a character. And he's done that pretty well so far. He's racked up quite a death count. Possibly in one of these videos I might do a small summary of what his kill count is to date. The other characters are nothing special. I've got a Duke with humility. His job is just to be the general, not to die, unlike Murder Duke, who quite often finds himself killed in return. He's there to give his significant experience and prestige to a bunch of peasants and make sure they don't run away. The Castellan adds a little bit of punch to the Peasant Crusaders, gives them devastating charge. The Damsel on Pegasus is here with shamanism, and ideally she will bring some totemic beasts onto the table. Sadly, not in this game, as you'll see. The Trebuchet used to be an auto-include, but nowadays it's a nice to have. It does a considerable amount of damage on blocks of troops, and it also seems to worry people, so I like to have it for that reason. I've got 2 night bosses. I know some people don't favour the night bosses, but I think their ability to get around the sides, their ability to disrupt units and to break units on the charge is phenomenal. Last time I played Beast Herds, I broke a unit of Longhorns by charging them in the rear with Knights of the Realm from 16 inches away. I think that kind of output of damage can't be matched. It's phenomenal, so I'm quite happy with these 2. I've also got 6 Knights of the Grail because they are among the best that humanity has to offer, if not the best, as they should be. The 2 Peasant Bowman units are there slightly as chaff, also to offer a potential character bunker for my Duke, and to offer a couple more scoring units as well. 3 Pegasus Knights, there to do what Pegasus Knights do well, which is to move fast, harass, and kill war machines ideally. And then the Peasant Blocks, the Peasant Crusaders, 25 of them. Give them a good leadership bubble and they will stand and die to the last man, and they have done a number of times for me, which is very helpful on many occasions. And Peasant Levy, I can't think of anything good to say about them, so I will leave them be. And here is the more detailed list if you want to have a look at it. So deployment, and here you'll see how I've structured my army. I set up first, so I dropped my whole army in the vague hope to actually secure first turn, knowing that he would have a lot of shooting to throw at me and it would be nice to have the choice of positioning. However, as is so often the case, with Equitaine, I had 0 opportunity to get the first turn. So there we are. The Knights Aspirant took the right hand flank for me, the Knights of the Realm took the left, along with the Pegasus Knights, Peasant Levy and Crusaders holding up the middle, Trebuchet on the hill to give it a good field of fire, the Bowmen beside it, 1 unit of Bowmen behind watching for the miners coming on, and the Murder Duke adopting a position largely behind impassable terrain. And my friend set up his army in a fairly tight formation, with solid blocks of troops to the right, and his missile troops strung out on the left, except for the marksman in front of the catapult, with the engineer hovering around to offer his support. Turn 1 for the dwarves, and obviously no charges, but everything starts to move forward. Greybeards and Kingsguard move up to close off that side of the battlefield. The Seekers move smartly forward, doing what Seekers do best, which is running straight into the jaws of anything. Forge Wardens sort of covering both sides of the impassable, I think was the aim here, and the Vengeance Seeker mirroring their moves. A whole ton of shooting went in this turn. The catapult took a heavy toll on my Peasant Levy. The Knights Aspirant took a wound, but other than that it was a case of weathering the storm and waiting for our chance to hit back. Equitaine turn 1, and as you might expect from an army like mine, there was a lot of movement happening. Knights Aspirant took a long journey around the ruins. The Grail Knights set up a charge next turn into the handgunners. The General took a bit of a dash out of my Bowman unit and set himself up behind the impassable, and thought it might not be clear on this particular map he was outside the charge arc of the Seekers. The Peasant Crusaders moved up forward to set up a titanic encounter between the better version of themselves that the dwarves have. The Peasant Levy did the very brave and very honourable thing of turning round and running away, because they were one of my scoring units, one of my enemy's target units, and so they had to hide. The Pegasus Knights took a nice swooping move to put themselves into the flank of the Greybeards. 0 chance that I was going to charge a block like that in the flank, since they don't have ranks and can't disrupt, but nice to have a position to harass, and it left the back of the field nicely open. The Damsel moved into position because her spell list, being largely subpar. She wasn't able to do most of the ranged options that I would have liked, so she took herself into position to cast some auras, and the Duke on the Hippogriff set himself up in front of a number of options for charging next turn. Very little magic except for Chilling Hull went off to make my units harder to damage with shooting, which was a welcome respite for some of them. Turn 2 for Dwarves, and you can see the huge array of movement which was on display as they shimmied around a little bit. The miners came on directly behind my Pegasus Knights. I think that might have been a little bit of a waste of their ambushing talents, but they decided they were going to take some pot shots. I think they managed to put a wound on the Pegasus Knights this turn with their pistols, so maybe it wasn't wasted. However, the rest of the Dwarven shooting continued to take a heavy toll on my army, with the poor damsel shot down with a hail of crossbow bolts. Putting her where she was, that might have been a bit of a mistake. I thought with all of her magical benefits, and plus the ward save and being on a Pegasus, she could have survived, but it was not to be. Meanwhile, the catapult took another chunk out of my peasant levy, only encouraging them in their decision to run the hell away and hide for the rest of the battle. Turn 2 for Equitaine, and this is where shit gets real. So, this is also where my camera footage ran out, so I have to apologize to my friend for slightly misportraying some of these elements here. But this was all done from memory, and I've since discovered that I don't have a very good memory. So, the Grail Knights charged the handgunners, who promptly fled, which was probably a sensible decision. Meanwhile, they were able to redirect and went into the Vengeance Seeker. That would continue to be one of the least enjoyable cavalry charges I think I've ever played. The Knights Aspirant also declared a charge on the handgunners to push them a bit further away. Obviously they weren't going to catch them, but there wasn't much for them to do this turn, so I thought shimmying them forward a bit would be helpful. The Peasant Levy went in behind the hill. The Peasant Crusaders attempted a charge on the Seekers and promptly failed. So they scuttled forward very slowly, as if they had friends in the Seekers and were reluctant to get into a fight with them. And finally, the Murder Duke went into the King's Guard. This is where my memory failed me, sadly. So what happened here was that the King's Guard did not flee. The King survived the first turn, and on the following turn the Marksman would charge in to support and lend static combat res. So apologies for the poor map. I will improve on those in future. The Pegasus Knights moved around to harass the catapult, and also the engineer and the marksman, and everything was looking okay for the Equitaine army. Sadly, the Grail Knights completely failed to kill the Vengeance Seeker, although he completely failed to kill us back, so I suppose one good turn and all, but with weapon skill 5, 12 attacks, 8 of them actually being able to be made on the Vengeance Seeker, and strength 6, you would have hoped that we could have finished him off. Sadly, it was not to be, and Vengeance Seekers being Vengeance Seekers, he wasn't about to run, so that combat was a push for next turn. Dwarves turn 3, this is where my poor memory continues to be a problem. The marksman charged into the Murder Duke to lend some static combat res because the King's Guard were still there. The engineer moved out to chaff and also fired his rocket at the Pegasus Knights, causing some damage and causing some problems for me. I think the miners must have just moved forward, and the Greybeards turned to make sure that the Knights of the Realm were definitely still in their front. The Forge Wardens reformed themselves into more of a combat-ready block. They took a few pot shots at the Knight Aspirant, I think, but nothing dramatic. The handgunners rallied to the bottom left, and the slayers, the seekers, gearing themselves up for a big fight with the crusaders, also failed their charge. So I believe the scene in question is reminiscent of Braveheart, with the Irish and the Scottish vaguely walking towards each other and shaking hands in the middle of the battlefield. Like I say, I'm pretty sure they have friends. So yeah, unfortunately for my friend's army, the king was murdered this turn. The marksmen lending their static combat res didn't help, and everything was still looking okay, apart from the fact that my Grail Knights continued to fail to do enough damage, any damage, I think, this turn to the Vengeance Seeker, who carried on carving his way through my poor elite phenomenal armor save and ward save knights, who apparently decided that today was the day to behave like wooden children with a toy horse. Equitaine turn 3, some things start going right now. The Pegasus Knights charged into the Engineer, and what happened then was that they overran into the back of the King's Guard where they were, which meant that they could join into the fight. That was a very bad decision because the King's Guard promptly killed them. Meanwhile, the Knights of the Realm charged into the flank of the marksmen, giving quite a lot of static combat res and disrupting the marksmen. Meanwhile, the Murder Duke was able to challenge the King's Guard's champion, and that way spare himself from lots and lots of King's Guard attacks by cutting down the champion in a challenge. So the combat res went very much in my favor, and they overran, I believe they overran, yes, the Knights chased down the marksman, the Duke on the Hippogriff chased down the King's Guard, and the Pegasus Knights were dead. So that's what left the Duke on the Hippogriff in front of those miners, ready to be charged in the flank. Meanwhile, the Knights Aspirant moved around within 8 inches of the handgunners so that they could charge without being stood and shot. The Peasant Crusaders decided not to close in with the Seekers, thinking that shooting would be the best way to whittle down their numbers a little bit. Sadly, my shooting was not up to scratch today, so that wasn't exactly my finest hour. The Knights of the Grail finally managed to cut down that pesky Vengeance Seeker, and reformed, only to find that with only 3 of their number left, they were facing an incoming charge from the Forge Wardens. So much for the elite cavalry of Equitaine, at least when they get into a fight when they haven't killed on the charge. Turn 4 for the Dwarves. Some things were going well for them. The Greybeards turned round, pointing their way towards the Knights of the Realm, who had by this time overrun and were menacing that catapult. However, combats really went for the Forge Warden and the Seekers. So the Forge Wardens hit the Knights of the Grail, hit them hard, while not causing any actual wounds. However, my Knights also failed to wound anyone. So after plinking off of each other, the Grails decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Some Knights they are, and were chased down by the Forge Wardens. So there's a nice 500 point present for my opponent. Meanwhile, the handgunners didn't really scratch the aspirants, but the Seekers started the process of grinding their way through my Peasant Crusaders. I feel like I have very few tools that can effectively deal with those Seekers. I don't bring enough shooting at the moment. Trebucheting them would be probably one of my better choices, but as always, Dwarves toughness 4, they're never quick to kill, that's for certain. And meanwhile, the miners charged into my Duke. I was pretty worried about my Duke at this point, I would have to say. They didn't have a champion, they didn't have anyone that I could hide him behind, so while he was cutting them apart, they were starting to take a toll on him, and it looked like he was very much set up for the Greybeards to put themselves into his flank, or into his rear even. So that was a little bit concerning, I would have to say. My turn 4, and here's where I thought the game was wrapped up. Thought it was all done and dusted when my Knights Aspirant hit their charge into the handgunners. You know, that should have been an easy win for them. They were still putting out 3, 6, 9. They were still putting out 10 or 11 attacks, all at strength 6. But as you'll see, that was not to be. So they scratched a little bit. I think the horses may have done more damage than the riders did this turn, but they did not do enough to break those damn dwarves and their high leadership. The Knights of the Realm, though, did their job, hit the catapult, hit it hard, and smashed it to smithereens, overrunning up onto that hill, not quite out of safe charge distance from the Greybeards, but far enough to be relatively confident. Dwarves have little legs after all. Meanwhile, on the bottom of the board, the Duke was able to finish off the miners, did enough to send them running, and fortunately was able to pursue them out of the Greybeard's charge arc. So that was ideal for me, but that's more or less the end of his battle. At this point, he has 3 wounds out of 4 on him. I'm not going to be committing him to anything else. But also, all of the shooting apart from the Forge Wardens is gone, and they're on the other side of the battlefield. So let's make sure he stays alive. The Seeker and Crusader combat continues. The Dragon Seeker is on fire, and not in the kind of way I would have preferred. He continues to cut apart half the unit by himself. He rarely ever scored less than 4 hits. In fact, I'm not even sure if he did, and most of the time he was wounding with those. My poor peasants were doing their best, and they were slowly taking a toll, but they were not setting the world alight, that's for sure. Dwarves turn 5, and things are looking reasonable, I would say, at this point. It's largely done and dusted. Most of the scoring targets that I had are gone. I'm not really struggling too much, but that handgun unit, I really want to finish that off to secure the victory for sure. Duke, that shows his overrun. Meanwhile, the Greybeards declare charge on the Knights of the Realm. They have to flee just to be absolutely certain that they're not going to be caught and cut down. So unfortunately, that makes their involvement in the combat with the handgunners that little bit less likely. It should have been possible, but as you'll see, they weren't going to be doing a whole lot there. Meanwhile, the Forge Wardens moved around the impassable and took a few shots at my general, which was a little bit worrying. I didn't think that he was exposed there, and suddenly he was. So that was a bit of a scare, but fortunately 4 shots from distance after moving wasn't going to cut him down in one go. So not too bad there. More wounds here. I haven't been religious in terms of removing all the casualties as they happen, but it was a bloodbath. That's a soggy red patch of ground right there in the middle of the battlefield. Equitaine turn 5. That Knights Aspirant versus the handgunners combat is still dragging on. I swear I thought that thing would never end, and if it did end, I thought I'd probably lose it. The Knights of the Realm rallied. They were still within charge distance of those Greybeards, and I was determined that I wasn't going to lose them to a freak long charge. So I rallied them and turned them sideways, so I put them out of the visibility of the Greybeards. So that put an end to that threat. Meanwhile, I moved my Duke up. He wasn't really doing anything. He was just march preventing, really. It didn't make a whole lot of difference. And the Duke General moved his way out of the arc of the Forge Wardens. Again, just trying to be careful. Thinking about it, I probably left him a bit too exposed to the Seekers had they won their combat and reformed in my turn. That's something I should have been alert to, although I think there were too many of the Peasant Crusaders left for them to die completely this turn. I started bringing the Peasant Levy out really just to act as a sponge to soak up any remaining damage from the Seekers, but this is all but a done deal. Turn 6 for Dwarves. The Seekers, largely that Dragon Seeker and that one remaining member of the original unit, the Standard Bearer, finish off the Peasant Crusaders. Fortunately, that's in his turn, so there's no way he's charging my general. So nothing is really going to happen up at that end. The Greybeards move into long range for the Trebuchet to make sure they're not being easily shot at. And finally a grinding combat goes my way. The Knights Aspirant do 3 wounds onto the handgunners. There is no steadfast, and with a banner versus no banner, they finally break them. Fail to chase them down, but again, that's not looking too difficult to mop those up. Forge Wardens take a few shots at the bowmen, but there's nothing doing for them at that point. And the final turn, the Knights Aspirant declare charge on the handgunners, chase them off the table. The Knights of the Realm declare a long charge on those Forge Wardens. It was never going to come off, but I think I needed double 6s for it. But nothing ventured, nothing gained, and there was nothing likely to be lost for it. So sadly, nowhere near. And the final throw of the dice was to throw every little bit of shooting I could at the Seekers and try to finish off the one normal Seeker that was remaining, hoping against hope that I could finally finish him off and get the full points for the unit. As it was, that was not to be, and so I ended up looking forlornly as these 2 remaining guys, half naked and standing in a pool of everyone's blood, just looked nonchalantly at a ton of arrows and some trebuchet stones hurtling past them. And there we are, that's the end of the battle. Totaling up the points, and this was a pretty solid win. 2,890 points for me versus 1,729 points for my friend. I still lost a few units a few points that I don't feel that I needed to. The Knights of the Grail particularly didn't need to. Yeah, I feel like on a good day they certainly wouldn't have died. The Murder Duke, well, he did his job. He killed the Dwarven King, he dropped their leadership, he helped break that unit. After that, he got mired into that combat with the miners, which eventually cost me half of his points. But overall, I mean, I can't really complain. It was a strong win. We took enough of the scoring units. I think we got all 3 of the scoring units, versus only maybe 1 of my scoring units, because I think it was the Grails, the Peasant Levy, and 1 of the Arch units. So it was a strong win. And my final thoughts. I think this was my list doing very much what it's intended to do. The center was held up by the peasant units. The trebuchet, the archers put a little bit of pressure on. They could have been a bit more effective. The knights did an excellent job of tying up the flanks and breaking through. The Murder Duke took out one of the main character threats. I would like to think that he would also be able to help with the Dragon Seeker, but sadly the Dragon Seeker is just too dangerous to put my Duke anywhere near. With all of my special rules, his special rules could quite possibly mean that he cuts down my Duke before my Duke even gets to look at him in a slightly cross way. So yeah, I mean, my Duke is doing his job. He's killing the Dwarven King. My friend didn't take the Bluffer's Helm equivalent rune, and that probably cost him a turn or 2 of durability on the King, but he says it's a janky combination that he doesn't want to take, and I can understand that. I have definitely twinked out this Duke with absolutely every possible item he could take. and he is a murder machine. That's what his job is. Sadly, if he doesn't get the combats that he wants, he can be a little bit ineffective, as I learned at the tournament the weekend after this game. But overall, this was a good run out for the list. It did its job. It showed those puny, stunted dwarves who was the true power in these lands, and they'll probably lose next time. But thanks all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if people do enjoy this, then I hope to make more of them in the future. Thanks very much.